The Chicago Bulls are sitting on a gold mine of trade assets right now, and they're about to flip the entire franchise upside down before February 5th. We're talking about 7 expiring contracts, hundreds of millions in salary cap flexibility, and a front office that's finally ready to push all their chips to the center of the table. This isn't another rebuilding year where the Bulls play it safe and limp into the play-in tournament. This is about Arturas Karnisovas having the power to make moves that teams like the Milwaukee Bucks, Dallas Mavericks, and Golden State Warriors can't even dream of right now because they're suffocating under the second apron. While superstars like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Anthony Davis, and Trae Young dominate the rumor mill with contracts so massive that finding legal trade scenarios feels impossible, the Bulls have something every contending team desperately needs in 2026: financial flexibility, movable pieces, and the ability to make deals actually work under the salary cap. And with just over a month until the deadline, the NBA world is watching Chicago closer than they have in years, because what happens in the next 33 days could define this franchise for the next decade. Before we break down every single angle of this absolutely insane Bulls trade deadline situation, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We're covering all the biggest NBA trades, rumors, and breaking news as we head toward February 5th, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. Let's start with where the Chicago Bulls are right now in early January 2026. 12 wins, 15 losses, hanging on to the 10th seed in the Eastern Conference by their fingernails. They've lost 7 straight games. 7! They got blown out by the 5-18 Indiana Pacers twice. They lost to the 3-21 New Orleans Pelicans. This isn't just a rough patch. This is a team in free fall, a roster that started the season 6-1 and had Bulls fans actually believing they might make the playoffs for the first time since 2022, only to watch everything collapse in spectacular fashion. Josh Giddey is out with a hamstring injury. Coby White has been dealing with calf problems that have kept him off the court for half the season. Isaac Okoro, Jalen Smith, Trey Jones, Kevin Huerter, all dealing with various injuries that have turned Billy Donovan's rotation into a revolving door of lineups that don't work. But here's the thing about the Bulls' situation that makes it so fascinating heading into this trade deadline. They're not stuck. They're not trapped in salary cap hell like so many other teams. They're not desperately trying to figure out how to squeeze a trade through the second apron restrictions that have paralyzed half the league. The Bulls, for all their on-court struggles, are in one of the most enviable positions of any team in the NBA right now when it comes to making moves. And it all comes down to one number: 7. 7 players on expiring contracts, 7 guys who are going to hit free agency this summer unless Chicago does something about it before February 5th. Nikola Vucevic making $21.5 million, Kevin Huerter $18 million, Zach Collins $18.1 million, Coby White $12.9 million, Ayo Dosunmu $7.5 million, Javon Carter $6.9 million, Dalen Terry on a smaller deal. Add it all up, and the Bulls have over $80 million in expiring salary that they can use to match in trades. That's unheard of flexibility in today's NBA. Teams around the league are drowning in long-term money, stuck paying players they don't want, unable to make moves because the collective bargaining agreement has turned roster construction into a financial nightmare. But the Bulls can take on bad contracts, absorb salary, facilitate 3-team or even 4-team deals, and extract draft picks and young players in return. ESPN's Bobby Marks, the salary cap guru who understands this stuff better than anyone, laid out the Bulls' trade deadline strategy perfectly in his recent breakdown of all 30 teams. He wrote that instead of using their cap space this summer during what's shaping up to be a weak free agent class headlined by guys like LeBron James and Kevin Durant who aren't realistic options for Chicago, it would be much more logical for the Bulls to identify players under contract for next season and acquire them now through trades. That's the play. Don't let these expiring contracts walk for nothing. Don't hope to land a big free agent in July when the market is thin and restricted free agents dominate the landscape. Make your moves now, when contending teams are desperate and willing to overpay for playoff help. And according to multiple reports from sources around the league, that's exactly what Arturas Karnisovas is planning to do. The Chicago Tribune's Julia Poe confirmed just 2 days ago that the Bulls have been labeled as one of the most prolific sellers in this year's trade market. This is a massive shift for a front office that went 3 straight years without making a single in-season trade. 3 years. That's how risk-averse Chicago has been under Karnisovas. But something changed this summer. The Zach LaVine trade to Sacramento at last February's deadline, the 3-team deal that sent LaVine to the Kings and brought back De'Aaron Fox to the Spurs, while Chicago grabbed their own first-round pick back and selected Noah Esengwe, that move finally freed the Bulls from salary cap prison, and now they're ready to be aggressive.
But here's where the Bulls' trade deadline gets really interesting. They're not just looking to dump their expiring contracts for pennies on the dollar. They want to extract value. They want young players under contract who fit their timeline. They want draft picks. They want to take advantage of teams that are feeling the squeeze of the second apron and need financial relief. ESPN's Bobby Marks specifically mentioned the Cleveland Cavaliers as a team the Bulls could target. Cleveland is set to owe roughly $170 million next season to just their core 4 players: Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen. Add in significant money committed to DeAndre Hunter and Max Strus, and the Cavs are in a really tough spot financially. Marks identified Hunter as a potential cap casualty. If Cleveland wants to shed salary, the Bulls could swoop in and take on Hunter's contract in exchange for draft capital or younger players. That's the type of move Chicago should be making. Find teams that are desperate to get under the luxury tax or avoid the second apron penalties. Teams like the Denver Nuggets, who have Julian Strawther and Peyton Watson on the roster, but might not be able to afford to pay Watson when he becomes a restricted free agent. Teams like the Philadelphia 76ers, who have Justin Edwards, a young wing with upside. Teams like the Golden State Warriors, who have Jonathan Kuminga potentially available if they're looking to reset their roster. The Bulls could package together multiple expiring contracts, take on money that extends beyond this season, and acquire players who are 23, 24 years old and still developing. Bill Simmons from The Ringer recently pitched a 3-team trade that would send Coby White to the Dallas Mavericks, Jonathan Kuminga to the Bulls, and Daniel Gafford, plus expiring contracts, to the Warriors. That's the type of creative deal that could actually work. Chicago gets Kuminga, a 22-year-old forward with huge upside who's been frustrated with his role in Golden State. Dallas gets a scoring guard to build around Cooper Flagg, their number 1 overall pick, as they move on from Anthony Davis. Golden State gets cap relief and a rim-protecting big in Gafford. It's not perfect, and the details would need to be worked out, but it shows the kind of multi-team trades the Bulls could facilitate because of their financial flexibility. Now, there's also been some absolutely wild speculation about the Bulls making a play for a superstar. Giannis Antetokounmpo's name keeps popping up in trade rumors, and according to a report from Lou Canellis of Fox 32 Chicago, Giannis and his representatives actually approached the Bulls about a potential deal, but Chicago wasn't interested. Nikola Vucevic even trolled Giannis about it after a recent game, saying he assumed Giannis was mad about the report that the Bulls didn't want to trade for him. That's fascinating on so many levels. Giannis, a 2-time MVP, one of the best players in the world, reaches out to the Bulls, and Chicago says no thanks. Why? Because the cost would be astronomical. Giannis is owed massive money, and trading for him would require gutting the entire roster, giving up all those draft picks the Bulls have been hoarding, and committing long-term to a 32-year-old superstar whose timeline doesn't match the rest of the team. Anthony Davis is another name that's been linked to the Bulls. ESPN's Jamal Collier reported that the Bulls have explored the idea of adding Davis from the Dallas Mavericks. Davis is a hometown kid, born and raised in Chicago, and pairing him with this young core could be intriguing. But Davis is also owed massive money, has dealt with injuries his entire career, and would cost a fortune in assets to acquire. Julia Poe from the Tribune mentioned Davis as a possible target, but she also noted that his preferred pace of play doesn't mesh with Billy Donovan's coaching style, and his health question marks make him a risky bet. The Bulls could make a run at Davis, but it would be a franchise-altering move that comes with huge risk. Here's what makes more sense for Chicago. Instead of swinging for the fences and trying to land a superstar, they should be aggressive about acquiring players under contract for next season who are in the 20 to 25-year-old range. Guys like Dyson Daniels from the Hawks, Jalen Duren from the Pistons, Tari Eason from the Rockets, Walker Kessler from the Jazz. These are young, talented players who might be available if their current teams are looking to make moves. Signing restricted free agents away from their teams in the summer is almost impossible, so trading for them now while they're still under team control makes way more sense. The Bulls also need to be smart about taking on bad contracts in exchange for draft picks. They have 7 expiring deals. That means they can absorb dead money without it affecting their long-term cap situation. If a team like the Wizards wants to dump C.J. McCollum's $33 million expiring or Chris Middleton's $30.7 million expiring, the Bulls should take those contracts, take a second-round pick or 2 as sweeteners, and flip those players again before the deadline or let them expire in the summer. That's how you build draft capital. That's how you accumulate assets without giving anything up.
Billy Donovan, the Bulls head coach, has been managing this situation as best he can. He recently unveiled a new starting lineup against New Orleans because of all the injuries, going big with Tre Jones as the lone guard alongside Isaac Okoro, Nikola Vucevic, Modest Buzelis, and Jalen Smith. They won that game 134-118, with Okoro dropping a season-high 24 points. But Donovan also admitted in a recent interview that he and Arturas Karnisovas haven't talked about the trade deadline at this point in time at all. That's interesting. Either the front office is keeping things close to the vest, or they're still figuring out their plan of attack. Donovan mentioned that he doesn't know how other teams evaluate players in contract years, and he's not sure how much the injury issues with guys like Coby White hurt their trade value. He's coaching to win games, which is his job, but he also understands that the front office has a bigger picture view of the franchise's direction. One thing that's become clear from all the reporting is that the Bulls are committed to keeping their young core intact. Josh Giddey, who just signed a 4-year, $100 million extension in October after a long standoff with the front office. Coby White, who they might trade but would prefer to keep if they can work out an extension. Modest Buzelis, their lottery pick from the 2025 draft, who's shown flashes of potential. According to ESPN's Jamal Collier, the franchise does remain committed to keeping that young core and wouldn't trade any of those players to get a deal done. That tells you the Bulls' strategy. They're not blowing it up completely. They're not tanking. They're trying to retool on the fly, get younger, add draft picks, and position themselves to make a real push in 2027 or 2028 when their young players hit their prime. But here's the harsh reality. The Bulls are 9-11 right now, sitting in 10th place in the East, and they just lost 7 straight games. Even with all their financial flexibility and trade assets, making the playoffs this season feels like a long shot. They're likely headed for their 4th straight play-in tournament appearance, and if they don't make moves at the deadline, they could miss the playoffs entirely and lose multiple rotation players for nothing in free agency. That would be a disaster. That would set the franchise back years. So the pressure is on Karnisovas to act. There's also the question of what happens with Josh Giddey. Giddey signed that massive extension, but he's been out with a hamstring injury for a few weeks now. He's a restricted free agent who got his money, but there are already questions about whether he and Coby White can coexist long-term in the backcourt. Both are ball-dominant guards who aren't great defenders. If the Bulls do move Coby White at the deadline, it essentially cements Giddey as the lead guard moving forward. But if they keep White, they're paying over $50 million a year for 2 guards who might not fit together. That's the dilemma Karnisovas is facing right now. As the February 5th deadline approaches, the rumors are only going to get louder. The Bulls have already been approached by teams interested in their players. Rival executives around the league know that Chicago is open for business. The question is what kind of return they can get. Can they turn Coby White into a first-round pick and a young player? Can they flip Vucevic for anything other than an expiring contract? Can they take on bad money and extract draft capital? Can they facilitate a 3-team or 4-team deal that brings back a player like Jonathan Kuminga or someone similar who fits their timeline? One advantage the Bulls have that not many people are talking about is their draft pick situation. Karnisovas, for all his mistakes over the years, has held on to the team's draft capital. Chicago has control of its own first-round picks from 2026 through 2032. That's 7 straight years of their own picks. They're also owed a pick from Portland that's lottery-protected through 2028. Assuming the Blazers, who made win-now moves last offseason, make the playoffs this year or next, that pick conveys to Chicago. So the Bulls could have 8 first-round picks over the next 7 years. Only 6 other teams in the NBA are in control of their next 7 first-rounders. That gives Chicago massive flexibility to use those picks in trades if they want to move up in the draft, package them for a star, or just keep them and build through the draft. There's also been speculation that if things really go south for the Bulls this season, they could make an even bigger move and trade guys like Josh Giddey or Modest Buzelis, but that seems unlikely based on everything we're hearing. The front office views Giddey and Buzelis as foundational pieces. They're not trading them unless someone makes an offer they can't refuse. And honestly, given what they gave up to get Giddey and where they drafted Buzelis, moving either of them now would be admitting they made a massive mistake. That's not happening. What's more likely is that the Bulls make 3 or 4 smaller moves before the deadline. Move Coby White for a future first and a young player, flip Vucevic for an expiring or take on a bad contract with draft compensation attached, trade Ayo Dosunmu to a contender for a second-rounder, maybe move Kevin Huerter or Zach Collins in a separate deal. The goal isn't to make one massive blockbuster trade. It's to turn all these expiring contracts into long-term assets, clear the books completely for the 2026 offseason, and position the team to be aggressive in free agency or trades next summer when the market resets. The timing of everything is crucial. The deadline is February 5th. That's just over a month away. Teams are still evaluating their own rosters, figuring out if they're buyers or sellers, waiting to see how January plays out before they make major moves. The Bulls need to be patient, but also aggressive. If a good offer comes in for Coby White, they need to pull the trigger. If a team offers them a first-round pick to take on a bad contract, they need to say yes. If they can facilitate a multi-team deal that brings back a young player with upside, they need to make it happen. One thing that's become clear in the new CBA era is that financial flexibility is more valuable than ever before. Teams that are over the second apron can't take back more salary than they send out in trades. They can't use trade exceptions. They can't sign bought-out players. They're essentially frozen, unable to improve their rosters. The Bulls don't have that problem. They can be the facilitators, the team that makes trades work for other franchises, and they can extract value for providing that service. According to a report from Pippen Ain't Easy, the latest NBA trade deadline rumor should be music to Bulls fans' ears. The article points out that while front offices around the league are struggling to find ways to cram superstar salaries into deals within the confines of the CBA, guys like Coby White, Ayo Dosunmu, and the other Bulls players on expiring contracts give opposing teams no headaches. They're affordable, they're productive, and they're exactly what contending teams need. The Bulls have leverage in these negotiations, and they need to use it. There's also been some discussion about whether the Bulls should consider tanking the rest of the season to improve their draft position. Right now, they're projected to pick somewhere in the mid-teens if they keep playing around 500 basketball. But if they trade away their best players and start losing games on purpose, they could move up into the top 10, maybe even the top 8. The 2026 draft isn't as stacked as last year's class with Cooper Flagg, but there's still talent to be had. The question is whether the ownership and the front office have the stomach to tank. The Bulls have always prided themselves on competitive integrity, on trying to win every game, and openly tanking would be a massive shift in philosophy. Ultimately, the next 33 days are going to define the Chicago Bulls' future for years to come. This trade deadline isn't just about making moves for the sake of making moves. It's about having a clear vision, a coherent strategy, and the courage to execute. If Karnisovas plays this right, if he turns all these expiring contracts into young players, draft picks, and future flexibility, the Bulls could be set up beautifully for a rebuild that actually works.
But if he whiffs, if he holds on to players too long and loses them for nothing in free agency, if he makes short-sighted moves just to stay competitive this season, the franchise could be stuck in mediocrity for another 5 years. The pressure is enormous. Bulls fans have suffered through decades of disappointment. They've watched rebuild after rebuild fail. They've seen draft picks busts, free agent signings go wrong, coaching changes that don't matter. This is Karnisovas's chance to finally get it right. He has the assets, the flexibility, and the opportunity to reshape this roster in a way that makes sense. 7 expiring contracts, draft picks galore, young players to build around. The pieces are there. Now it's about putting them together. And let's not forget, this trade deadline is going to be wild across the entire league. Giannis rumors, Anthony Davis speculation, teams making desperate moves to stay competitive. The Bulls are going to be in the middle of all of it, fielding calls, making offers, trying to find the right deals. It's going to be chaos. But if there's one thing we've learned about NBA trade deadlines, it's that anything can happen. A deal that seems impossible on January 3rd could be announced on February 4th. A player who everyone assumes is staying could be moved in a shocking trade. The Bulls could end up making moves nobody saw coming. Right now, as we sit here in early January 2026, all we know for sure is that the Chicago Bulls are open for business. They have assets that teams want, and they're willing to make deals. Everything else is speculation, rumors, and educated guessing. But the fact that the Bulls are finally being aggressive, that they're finally embracing the trade deadline instead of hiding from it, that's a step in the right direction. For years, this franchise has been too passive, too scared to make big moves, too committed to mediocrity. Now they have a chance to change the narrative. Now they have a chance to actually build something sustainable. The question is whether they'll have the guts to do it.